Welcome everybody to the webinar, How to Supercharge Your Automation in Jira Cloud. My name is John and I am the Product Marketing Manager for the automation team. I'm joined by Andreas, who is the software architect, but also the guy who helped co-build automation for Jira. So you're in very good company when it comes to learning about the more advanced use cases in automation. I'm really confident you're going to love the content and the demo that Andreas runs through in a few moments, and I'll let him introduce himself then as well. What I'll do is just start off with a little bit of housekeeping. So I'll start with the most common question that's asked, which is this webinar going to be recorded? Yes, indeed, it is being recorded, and I will email it to everybody who has registered a couple of days after the webinar. Secondly, if you haven't already attended our first webinar, which was called Intro to Automation in Jira, I've included a link to it in there in the console, and I would really encourage you to go back and watch that in your own time. It's not to say that you're not going to learn a lot from this today. I just think the two go hand in hand really well. If you have any questions, you'll see a questions and answers widget there in front of you, and I'd really encourage you to ask as many as you like. Myself and Andreas will answer, mostly Andreas will answer at the end, as many as we can vocally. But we also have a team behind us this time who are going to help answer those questions as we go through. Okay, let's kick onwards. So what we're going to be covering today, as promised in the invitation, I'm not going to waffle on in a PowerPoint slide for 45 minutes. Rather, I'm going to hand it over to Andreas pretty quickly to run through the demos and actually teach you all about automation. What I will do is just start off with what I've ambitiously called a 4-minute automation refresher, where I'll just run back through very, very briefly what we covered in the first webinar so we can all start from the same footing. Secondly, I'm going to just dip into smart values, regardless of whether you use these or not, or you don't even know what they are. They're super powerful. They add a ton to automation, and pretty much all of the use cases that Andreas is running through later on involve smart values. So I'll show you at a very basic level what they are before Andreas takes it in context to the next level. The vast majority of the time, Andreas will run through the 3 demo rules. As he does, again, keep in mind the webinar is recorded, so you can go back and watch it at your own pace afterwards. I'll give Andreas a little chance to catch a breath and go and have a Diet Coke while I'll just run through the last couple of slides, which will be telling you about what's next for automation, and also a little bit about Atlassian University if you want to extend your education. We'll finish off, as ever, with a live Q&A, so fire those questions through. Okay, let's get started. Andreas, you can get the stopwatch running. I've got 4 minutes. So brief summary, what is automation in Jira? First of all, it is available across all Jira products. So that means it's available across Jira Software, Jira Service Desk, and Jira Core. Every single cloud admin has access to automation, though you do have to be an admin. The global administrator is the only one who can create global rules or multi-project rules. I've included this diagram just to really drive home the point that although this is Jira automation, you can automate across multiple products, and you've got to get a good feel for that today in the tools, in the use cases that Andreas runs through. So for example, you could automate across the likes of Microsoft Teams, Slack, Twilio, Bitbucket, GitHub natively, or you could use web requests to interact with pretty much any third-party tool. A bit later on, I think Andreas is going to run through how to use a web request with Jenkins, for example. So you can automate almost anything. There are unlimited automation rules across single projects, and there are some limits to consider when it comes to multi-project and global rules. I'll run that over a little bit more in detail after Andreas's demo. So every rule starts off with a trigger. And a trigger just means that we're listening for an event that's happened in Jira or elsewhere if we're using web requests. And from there, we perform an action based on the conditions that we set. So in the first webinar, I used the example of it being like Lego blocks. You just put these blocks together in different ways to automate pretty much anything you want. Now, later on, we're going to be building a bit of a Lego super castle with Andreas. But for now, I'll keep it simple and just show you these building blocks. So everything starts off with a trigger. We'll just use the issue transition trigger here. And I'll leave the status blank. Now I can go to a branch rule, and we'll look into that later on, or we can just set a condition. For us, we'll say whenever the assignee field is empty. So if an issue is transitioned and the assignee field is empty, which I'm sure you've all seen before, what we want to do is just assign that. So we'll assign the issue to the user who triggered the event. Simple as that. You can obviously add so much more power to it, but we'll leave it be for now. we'll save that and have a quick look into the rule details where we can name the rule, give the rule a description, set the scope. Do we want it to run on just this project, across multiple projects, all projects, or just software projects? And really that would be it. But what we can do is take it a couple of steps further with smart values. So I'm sure there's a mixture of people who are watching here now. Some might be using some smart values, some might be creating their own smart values, and some might be wondering, why does he keep saying the word smart values? What are they? So fear not, Andreas is going to be running through them in context and in great depth with you. But at a very basic level, smart values help you to personalize rules and make it more accessible. Really, you can access and manipulate almost any data in Jira. And let me give you a bit of an example here in context. So let's say we wanted to comment on an issue. So what we could do is say, hey, automation has done this, or something slightly less contrived. That's good. It's one level better. You know, we can get full transparency and see what's happened. But we can go better again. And this is what smart values look like. So you just see the curly brackets. It's kind of like JSON. So for example, reporter.displayName will just print off John McKiernan, my full name. So for us, instead of saying, hey, automation has done this, we can pop in a message like this. Hi, assignee.displayName. So hi, John McKiernan, you've been assigned this issue. Much love, automation bot. So a very, very basic example, but I think this is a perfect time to hand over to Andreas, who's going to kick off and show you some more complex stuff.
Thanks, John. Okay, so my name's Andreas, and I'm the architect on automation for Jira. So I was actually one of the people that came up with this crazy idea about 3 years ago, and have been working on it ever since, and been adding lots of improvements and new features to automation for Jira for the last 3.5 years. So hopefully today I can demo a few more advanced rules that will help you solve some more interesting use cases than we covered in the first webinar. So we're going to look at 3 rules, as John mentioned earlier. And the first one I'm going to show you now is actually going to demonstrate a brand new feature that we've just released to Cloud. So the problem we're trying to solve here is a pretty common one. We basically want to send out a report or a notification once per day, letting our dev team know about all the issues that are still in progress in this sprint. So you can see here I'm in a software project on the active sprint board, and we've actually got only one issue that's been done, car 2, and all these other issues are still waiting to be developed on. And so as a team lead or project manager, I kind of just want to send a snapshot of all these issues that are left outstanding to my team every day in a Slack message. So let's take a look at doing that with automation. So up until now, this wasn't really possible. Like, you couldn't send a summary message with a number of issues included. You could only send a message per issue, but we've now just added a new feature to make it possible to send reports, emails, Slack messages, whatever you want really, with any number, with a number of issues included. Okay, so let's go ahead and build a rule for this. And by the way, I should mention that there will also be a blog published alongside this webinar with more details for this particular feature that I'm going to show you today. Okay, so let's jump into the automation project admin section here for this project. And I'm going to go ahead and jump straight in and create a rule. And so if you watched our first webinar, this will be pretty familiar. The first thing I have to do is create a trigger for this rule here. And so for this rule, I'm going to use a scheduled trigger. So I basically want to run this rule every day to let my dev team know every day about what issues are outstanding. So I can just use a fixed rate schedule here to run every day. Or if you wanted to be a bit more specific with what time of day you wanted to run it, you could actually use a cron expression as well, where you're specifying exactly what time in the morning, for example, you want to send that Slack message. But for this demo, I'm just going to pick a daily schedule. Okay, and then next I get to introduce this new lookup issues action that we've just shipped to automation for Jira in Cloud. So this is an action that allows you to run a JQL search and basically store that result of that JQL search in a new smart value called lookup issues. And we'll look at how you can use that smart value in a second. For now though, let's first of all define our JQL. So what I'm going to do here is simply look for our active sprint. So I'm going to look for the sprint field to be in our open sprints. And then I'm going to only retrieve issues that are not done yet in the active sprint. Okay, now that we've added this lookup issues action, for any subsequent component in this rule, I can now use that new smart value. And so what I'm going to do today is actually send a Slack message, but you could actually use this with pretty much any other action that we have. So you could send an email with all those issues as well. You could send a Twilio notification, or you could even add a comment on another issue, or use any of one of our actions and use that smart value. But today, let's use a Slack message, and I'm going to insert a Slack webhook here that I've prepared earlier. If you need to do this for the first time, you can simply go to this link that we have in the UI here, and that will take you to a Slack account where you can configure this integration basically to send Slack messages. Okay, and then the only thing we have to do now is insert our message here. So in this case, I'm just telling our team that we've got some issues left in this sprint, and then I can finally use our new lookup issues smart value. So what I'm doing here is using our list iteration syntax, which is basically putting this hash prefix in front of the smart value and then closing off the block with a slash. So any smart value that is a collection of items. So in this case, we have a number of issues that were looked up, or you could also use this with a list of comments on an issue. You can iterate over those individual items by simply prefixing the smart value with a hash and then closing off the block like so. And then you can access and print out various attributes of the individual issues inside this block. So in this case, I'm just creating a bulleted list with the issue key. Now, this might be a little bit complex and overwhelming how I arrived at this smart value, but just to let you know, we actually have some docs in the product here that actually tell you about more examples of these smart values. And in fact, if you jump across to our documentation, we do include lots more examples that will give you pretty much 90% of the fields that you need to access. So for example, any kind of general fields are listed in our docs here. And then we also have some more docs about how to access collections or lists of items. So for example, here you can see an example of how you could print out a comma separated list of all the labels on an issue. So we have detailed docs around how to use these smart values. And it's definitely something down the track we will also look at improving in the product by introducing some kind of smart value autocomplete or builder. But that's still a while away before we'll get around to introducing that. Okay, so let's jump back to this rule and actually give it a go. So let's save this, give it a name. So let's just call this notify about open issues in the sprint and turn it on. And then because this is a scheduled rule, you get a really quick and easy way to try this out. Scheduled rules just have this run rule button at the top where you can actually just go ahead and execute the rule immediately. So if I jump across to the audit log now, we can actually see that the rule's already executed and we successfully send a Slack message. And the nice thing about this new lookup issues action is it actually tells you in the audit log which issues it managed to find. And if I jump across to our Slack account now and go up to this demo room that I have here, you can actually see the message that we created in here as well. And you'll actually notice that we have pretty much all of our issues that are still in to do and in progress. The only one that's missing here is car-2, which is the only issue that we had in the done column over here. Okay, so that's good so far, but what if we wanted to improve this a little bit more? So what if we actually wanted to include a link to these issues? We can do that quite easily simply by using Slack's link syntax in messages. So we've got an example down here. So the way to include a link in a Slack message is basically including the URL first, followed by this pipe character, and then like a name for the link. And so that's exactly what I've done now in my message up here, except I'm using smart values to populate the URL, which will be the issue URL. And the name of the link will basically be the issue key. And so if I go ahead and save this, publish these changes, and then try running this rule again, we should actually now see, if I come back to my Slack channel here, that we now actually have issue keys listed here that are links to the Jira issue. And so you can see very quickly how there's a lot of power here with these smart values, and how you can really solve a lot of complex use cases, whether it be reports or notifications, very quickly with these automation rules using smart values. As I mentioned, there's very detailed docs about smart values that will give you lots of examples of how to access various fields and various information about Jira issues. But once again, we've very quickly here created a rule that adds a lot of extra power on top of Jira. Okay, so let's start with our next rule. So with this next rule, we're going to look at another really popular use case in Jira, and that's keeping parent and subtask issues in sync. Now, we showed you some similar stuff in our first webinar, but this time we're actually going to look at a very specific use case involving smart values. And that's to keep story points between parent and subtasks in sync. So you can see here in my sprint in this software project that I've got a parent issue here to assemble a car, which currently does not have any story points set. But there's already two subtasks that have story points set with the value 2, and then there's a third subtask here that still doesn't have any story points. Now, one thing that Jira doesn't do out of the box is when you update story points on subtasks, it doesn't then automatically update the parent with the sum of these story points. So today I'm going to show you a rule how you can, and that will show you how you can basically do this. So let's jump back to our rule builder. And this time we're going to use a different trigger than we did before. So in this example, we need to kick off the rule whenever the story points field on an issue has been updated. Next, we want to make sure that the issue that we're editing is in fact a subtask issue type. So for this, I'm going to use a condition. Now, we introduced this in our first webinar, but conditions are a great way to filter down which issues you want an automation rule to really run for. So in this case, I can say that only issues where the issue type is a subtask issue type do we want to continue executing this automation rule. Okay, so now once I've got this set up, we then need to actually navigate up to our parent issue. So right now, this rule is basically executing for any subtask that has its story points value changed. But now it's time to actually move up to the parent of that subtask and edit the story points on the parent issue. And to do that, we can use our branch rule or related issues component. So this is a great little component that allows you to action tasks on various different types of related issues. So you can do things with parents and subtasks, or with stories and epics, or you could even just find linked issues or related issues with JQL. But for today, we're going to jump up to the parent issue, and then we need to edit the parent issue. And in fact, we want to update the story points on the parent issue. And as always, as you build the rule, you get a nice little summary on the left here of what is actually going to happen. So you can really easily follow along what this automation rule will do. Okay, so we're now finally at the step where I can introduce this smart value. So basically what we want to do is we want to grab all the subtasks of this parent issue. So the issue here is the issue introduced by the parent branch. So the issue here is actually the parent itself. And I want to go through all the subtasks, grab the story points on those subtasks, and then sum up those story points. So this sum function here is something fairly new that we've only introduced a couple of weeks ago, which basically allows you to calculate an aggregate math function across any number of issues. And you can use this, in fact, with any number custom field. So in our example today, we're using story points, But if you have some other type of number field that you're using to track various bits of information across the issues, you can use sums, averages, max and min type functions to calculate new values on say, a parent issue or related issues. Okay, so let's go ahead and try this out. So I'm just going to give this a name. So we're going to call this key parent and subtask story points in sync. And let's actually try this out. So we're going to jump back here to our Agile board, and I'm actually going to add some story point estimates for building the transmission or adding the transmission to this car. So a slightly more complex task, we'll give this 4 points. Now, first of all, if I come back to the automation rule and take a look at the audit log, you can see that the rules kicked off immediately. And as usual, we can tell that, okay, the rule was triggered on our subtask issue here, and then we correctly navigated up to the parent issue and we edited that issue successfully. And in fact, if I come back to our Agile board here, we can see that the parent issue has been updated already with the total sum of the story points of all the subtask issues. So once again, very quick and easy way to build this automation rule. That's just adding that little bit more power on top of Jira. And as I mentioned, you can use these smart value functions with any number field. So it's not just limited to story points. So hopefully this is going to open up a whole lot more interesting use cases that you can use automation for Jira to save yourself some time every day when you're keeping issues in sync. Okay, let's start on rule number 3. So for this last example today, we're going to build by far our most complex automation rule yet. So with this example, I'm going to show you how you can use automation for Jira to integrate a number of third-party systems. So in particular, we're going to look at how you can hook up Bitbucket pull requests with Jira issues. And then finally, how you can perform actions in another third-party system, Jenkins in our example today, to perform some additional build tasks. So the scenario we're going to automate in particular is a very common one in a software development flow. So what developers do quite often is they write some code, raise pull requests, either in GitHub or Bitbucket. We can actually support both now with automation for Jira. And then eventually those pull requests are merged into the master branch of your source repository. And when you merge, usually what happens is you want to then mark a number of issues that were fixed by that pull request as done. And ideally, you then want to actually go ahead and deploy your software. So actually create a release, ship it out to your customers so they get the benefits of all those fixes that you've just performed. Now, traditionally, that involves a lot of manual tasks. You have to update issues manually. You have to move them to the right status. You have to let assignees know, and somebody actually has to go and deploy your software. Today, I'm going to show you how you can very quickly and easily automate a lot of this. Okay, so first of all, let's start with our rule. So let's go in and create our rule. And for this rule, we're going to use one of our brand new DevOps triggers. So these triggers allow you to react whenever development related actions happen in a Git repository. So this could be GitHub or Bitbucket. Today, we're going to use Bitbucket. So you can react to things like branch created or commit created. In this example, we're going to react to when a pull request is merged. So I have a number of pull requests that I prepared earlier. So let's just jump across to our pull requests here in our Bitbucket repository. So there's 2 pull requests that are waiting to be merged that are related to issues in my cars project in Jira. So we've got like 1 pull request for car 3 and 1 for car 4. And I'm going to show you how you can update these issues in Jira when you merge them in Bitbucket here with an automation rule. Okay, so we've got the beginnings of our automation rule. So we have a trigger that will run this rule when a pull request is merged. Now, the next thing we want to do is actually add an issue condition to check that this rule only runs when an issue is still in progress. So if we come back to our Agile board here, we actually only really want to run this rule when on these issues that are in progress and make sure we don't kind of update or or run this rule for issues that are already done. So again, we can use an issue field condition here to simply add this in progress status check. And then we can actually go ahead and start building the actions in this rule. So first of all, this rule should transition issues to done because we've merged all the code and we don't need to do anything anymore. But the other thing we would like to do with this rule is actually notify the assignee on this issue as well and let them know that, hey, we've merged some code here and it's probably time to do a release. So once again, we can just add a comment here with our comment issue action and some smart values. So the smart values that we're using in particular are, first of all, we're introducing the issue key for the issue that was merged with this pull request in the comment using the issue key notation. And then we're also mentioning the assignee. So we've got our assignee smart value up here. And we're using this together with the standard wiki markup for mentioning a user, which is this square bracket tilde account ID syntax. Now, once again, this might look pretty complicated, but we do have help available directly in the product here. So if you follow these links down here, you'll get more guidance on the actual wiki markup. So how you can construct these mentions and also what smart values are available. And we will also be publishing a community post alongside this webinar, which will have more information about these smart values. Okay, so we've added a comment now, and that's good. That's notifying the assignee on this issue. But what if we actually wanted to let the entire dev team know that there's some changes that we would like to release here? So we can add a Slack message again to this rule and use the same webhook that we created earlier. And then we can simply insert a message here that will get sent to our dev team. So in this particular Slack message, we're using yet another smart value, this time some pull request information. And so this smart value is actually provided by this particular trigger here in the rule. So the pull request merge trigger is inserting some extra context to our smart values that lets you then actually use some of this information from this trigger. So in this case, we can access the pull request URL and the pull request title and include a link in our Slack message to this pull request. And once again, our docs have more information about what fields and what information is available from this pull request trigger. And then last but not least, we can also include emoticons to make this a little bit more interesting and hopefully grab someone's attention so that they will start actually deploying this source code. All right, so let's go ahead and try this out. So let's include a message here for this and try out running this rule. Okay, so let's jump in and go to our first pull request, and I'm going to go ahead and merge this. So now magically behind the scenes, Bitbucket is actually going to notify automation for Jira in this Jira project that's been linked up to this Bitbucket repository. And if we come to the audit log, then we can see that the rule here has already kicked off and is running. And there we go. We've already gone ahead and now performed all the actions that we defined in this rule. So just to recap, when this pull request is merged, we check if the issue that was mentioned of the pull request is in progress. We then go ahead and transition it to done. We added our comment and we also send a Slack message. And you can see exactly what happened over here in the audit log, which issue was transitioned, what it was transitioned to, and all those messages that we added. And so let's actually go ahead to our Agile board. And you can see here that the car 3 issue that we just merged has actually jumped across to done. And there is a comment down here that was just added by this automation rule. And then if we jump across to Slack, you can see that we've got a message here with our nice little rocket emoticon and a link to the pull request that was just merged directly in the Slack room for the dev team. So this by itself is already a pretty massive time saving. So you don't have to keep issues up to date anymore manually. this automation rule can be configured to move your issues to the correct status. You could even add a version number as well to issues and so on. There's really a lot of different ways you can combine the different building blocks that we have in automation for Jira to solve many, many different use cases here. But let's take this example a little bit further. So right now, all this rule does is notifying our dev team that, hey, we should actually go ahead and kick off a deployment. Now, while that's nice and good, it still means there's a manual step for someone to go ahead and perform that deployment. So now I'm going to show you how you can actually integrate automation for Jira with pretty much any third-party system through our send web request action to perform some tasks in a third-party system. So one thing I did earlier is I actually set up a Jenkins build server, which is a pretty popular open source build server that a lot of software development teams out there use to build their software. And I've created a little sample project in here called the car assembly line. So if we jump into this project and have a look at the configuration, it simply uses a generic webhook trigger to kick off a build in Jenkins. And what this does is it basically provides you with a URL that you can send a web request to, and then this Jenkins build server will actually just kick off a build and start building something. And then the build is, in this example, just a bit of like some logging, but in the real world, you would obviously actually build your software artifacts here, and then you could do things like uploading them to a marketplace or deploying them to your production environment. Whatever you need to do basically to ship your software to your customers. Okay, so let's have a look at how we can invoke this particular build from automation for Jira. So we can come back to our rule here and then simply add another action to send a web request. So this is our way of integrating with pretty much any third-party system. So I can simply include my URL here to my Jenkins server that I just showed you, which will then kick off that build in Jenkins. You can include additional headers. So some third-party services might require custom authentication headers or some other specific headers in the web request. And you can also send different types of HTTP requests. In this case, I'm using a post, but you could also send put or get requests. And then finally, you can actually include some data with the request. So I could simply include the full issue data of the issue that's been merged, or I can include some custom data, which is what I'm going to do today. So in this example, I'm simply going to send a message that will then get printed out by Jenkins to tell us what issue was merged here. So by itself, this would already work. And by default, these send web request actions are send and forget. So automation for Jira would send this web request and then the automation rule would be done. But one more option that we've added to our send web request, which is really, really powerful, is this wait for response option. So what you can do with this is you can actually wait until the third-party system, Jenkins in this case, will respond or send us a response to this web request. And then with this new smart value, you can actually access the data that was provided to us in the response from Jenkins. So I can go ahead and save this here, and then I can add a log action, for example, which is a great way to debug smart values, by the way. So you can use this to just print out smart values to the audit log. And in this case, you can see here, I've sent my web request. The rule's then going to wait for the response from Jenkins. And I'm simply going to print out the full details of the response that we received back from Jenkins in the audit log. So just to cover this rule again, so it's doing exactly the same as we did before. We're still transitioning issues, adding comments, sending Slack messages, but we're now also sending a web request out to our Jenkins server and then waiting for the response and printing the response details. Now, you could also use this webhook response for some other things. You could actually add a comment to the issue with the response body if our Jenkins server was returning something useful in the response that we wanted to add to the issue that was merged up here. So it's a really you can see very quickly how you can use this to build up some very powerful rules that integrate with third-party services. But let's actually try this out. So I'm going to come back here and merge my other pull requests that I've got waiting and see what will happen. So we'll go ahead and merge this. And once again, this now pushes a message to Jira, which will kick off this automation rule and perform all the steps that we just configured. Okay, so we can see here that the rule has now kicked off already, and we have a successful execution. And when I expand this, we get all the details again. So this time we ran this rule against issue car number 4, and we transitioned that issue, added a comment, and sent a Slack message again. But we also published a webhook, and then we received a webhook response back from our Jenkins server with a successful 200 response status. And so now if I jump across to Slack, again, we get the same message here. But more importantly, if I come into my Slack build server here and reload, then we can see here that there's a build that was kicked off just a few seconds ago. And if I go to the output in the console here, we can see the webhook body that I included in my automation rule. And then we can go see here that our build actually kicked off and it started assembling our car, and finally our build was done and the deployment was successful. And then finally, if we come back to Jira again, to our Agile board, you can see now as well that this car 4 issue was also moved across to done. So again, we've really just combined all the different building blocks that automation for Jira has to offer to solve a slightly more complex use case here. So on the surface of it, this might seem like a pretty complex rule, but all we're doing is just adding more of our building blocks to perform a more complex use case. And so you can really open up a lot of extra power here in Jira, and not just do things with issues in Jira, but also integrate with various dev tools, various other services that you might have in your organization, and really use Jira as the central hub to perform all these different actions and keep visibility of all these different actions in your organization. So that's pretty much it for the demo today. So hopefully you got a lot of value out of these 3 rules. And hopefully this has given you some great ideas on how you can build some automation rules that will add a lot of power on top of your Jira installation in your organization. So thank you.
Okay, awesome. Thanks for that, Andres. Really appreciate you taking the time, and I hope everybody learned lots from it. I know I did the first time you ran through it with me. I think it's probably a good time to say, if you have a thirst for further knowledge with automation, a good place to turn is Atlassian University. And in there, we have a new automation course coming up. It's 4 hours long, and it's the perfect jump off point from here for you to advance your automation skills. The team there have done a great job building out that content. It's going to be ready in July. So just follow that link that you see there in front of you. I've also put it into the console so you can get updates when it's ready. I mentioned a little earlier about the limits with automation. So there are no limits at a single project level. Every single person has unlimited single project automation rules, though there are some limits to consider in the global and multi-project rules. So for a standard plan, that's 500 per month, whereas in a premium plan, that's 1,000 per user per product per month. So for example, if you have 100 users in Jira software, then you're gonna have 100,000 global automation rules, which you can use per month. So it is a part of the premium package. And again, one of the questions that came through quite a lot in the first webinar was, well, what else is in the premium package apart from automation? So I thought I'd just put this slide in here quickly for you guys. There's things like admin insights, unlimited storage, 99.9% uptime SLA, and probably the biggest one, which we've released just last month, is advanced roadmaps, which has been really, really popular with this cohort. So it helps you to plan and track roadmaps across your teams and your projects so you can get ahead of them when making plans. Takes into account things like dependencies, capacity, and releases. Basically gives you a bit of a macro level view of the work being done across teams while still giving the ability to get info from sort of individual tasks and stories if you want to. So really, really useful. And if premium is something that you want to consider, This is how you can do it. You'd simply go to your settings, billing, manage subscriptions, and you can get a free trial of Jira Premium for at least a month. It's not for everybody, but if you do want to try it, that's how you do it, and we think it really is worthwhile. Okay, that's enough from me. It's time for us to turn it over to your questions. Looking forward to getting through them.